My name is Natalie, and I'm 32. 3 hours ago, my sister-in-law looked my 7-year-old daughter straight in the eye and told her she didn't belong in our family because she doesn't share our blood. The silence that followed was deafening. Then my husband did something that changed everything. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. But let me back up and tell you how we got here, because this story starts way before tonight's dinner disaster. It starts with loss, love, and a little girl who became the center of my world when I thought my world had ended. 5 years ago, I was 27 and planning a wedding that would never happen. David and I had been together since college, one of those steady relationships that everyone assumed would lead to marriage and white picket fences. We just moved in together, and I was secretly hoping he'd propose soon. Then I found out I was pregnant. I remember staring at that positive test in our tiny bathroom, hands shaking with excitement and terror. When David came home from his construction job that evening, covered in sawdust and smiling, I practically bounced off the couch. "I have news," I said, barely able to contain myself. His face lit up. "Good news or bad news?" "Depends on your perspective," I said, handing him the test. The smile never left his face, just grew bigger. He picked me up and spun me around our cramped living room, both of us laughing like kids. "We're having a baby," he kept saying, like he couldn't believe it. "We're really having a baby." 3 weeks later, David was driving to the hardware store to buy paint for the nursery we'd started planning. The semi-truck ran a red light at 60 miles per hour. The police officer who came to my door said he died instantly. He never knew what hit him. Small mercy, I guess. But it also meant he never knew that our baby would have his dark hair and his stubborn chin. He never knew she'd laugh the way he did, with her whole body. Grief during pregnancy is its own special kind of hell. You're growing life while processing death. Your body is changing, preparing for joy while your heart is breaking. I went to every prenatal appointment alone, watching other couples hold hands during ultrasounds while I gripped the armrest of the examination table by myself. My mom tried to help, but she lived 8 hours away and had her own health issues. David's parents blamed me somehow, as if my pregnancy had distracted him into that intersection. They wanted nothing to do with me or their grandchild. Fair enough. I stopped trying to include them after they hung up on me when I called to tell them Emily had been born. Emily. I named her after David's grandmother, the one person in his family who'd ever shown me genuine kindness. She would have loved this little girl with the bright eyes and easy smile. Those first months were brutal. You don't realize how many simple tasks require 2 people until you're doing everything alone. Holding a screaming baby while trying to sterilize bottles, grocery shopping with a car seat that weighs more than the baby, trying to work while she napped, hoping she'd stay asleep long enough for you to finish one assignment. But Emily and I figured it out together. We had our routines, our little jokes, our quiet moments when it was just us against the world. I worked freelance marketing from home, which paid the bills but didn't offer much social interaction. Most days, Emily was the only person I talked to, and she wasn't exactly conversational yet. When Emily turned 1, I decided we needed more people in our lives. Not romance, I wasn't ready for that yet, but friendship, community, something beyond the 4 walls of our apartment. I started taking her to the park regularly, hoping to meet other parents. That's where I met Sarah, a single mom with a son Emily's age. We bonded over the shared exhaustion of solo parenting. "You should come to the community center," Sarah told me one afternoon while our kids played in the sandbox. "They have a young parent support group. Nothing heavy, just coffee and conversation while the kids play." The community center looked like every community center ever built. Fluorescent lights, motivational posters, that smell of floor cleaner and hope. The support group met in a room with a circle of mismatched chairs and a corner full of toys that had seen better days. That's where I first saw Caleb. He was sitting across the circle, bouncing a toddler on his knee, while listening to another parent talk about potty training disasters. The little boy had Caleb's sandy hair and the same green eyes, but something about their interaction seemed different from the other parent-child pairs in the room. After the meeting, I was wrestling Emily into her jacket when the little boy toddled over and handed her a toy truck. Emily, who was going through a phase where she rejected most social overtures, actually smiled and said, "Thank you," in her clearest voice yet. "That's progress," Caleb said, approaching with that easy smile. Mason's usually pretty possessive of his trucks. Emily's usually pretty suspicious of new people, I admitted. Good instincts, actually. We stood there watching our kids interact with the careful attention of parents who've learned that playground dynamics can shift from peaceful to chaotic in seconds. Mason was chattering at Emily in that earnest way toddlers have, pointing at different toys and apparently explaining their various functions. "Your son's quite the salesman," I said. "My nephew, actually," Caleb corrected. "I'm watching him while my sister works. Been our routine for about 6 months now." I looked at him more closely. Mid-30s, laugh lines around those green eyes, wearing a t-shirt that had definitely seen better days but was clean. There was something solid about him, steady in a way that reminded me of David, but without the painful comparison that usually accompanied such thoughts. "That's really nice of you," I said. "Not everyone would take on that kind of responsibility." He shrugged. "Mason's easy. Besides, my sister needed help, and I needed something to do with my afternoons. Win-win." We ended up walking to the parking lot together, both of us moving at the glacial pace required when herding 1-year-olds. Emily had apparently decided Mason was acceptable company and kept looking back to make sure he was still following us. "Same time next week?" Caleb asked as we reached my car. "Probably," I said, then added with more certainty, "Yes, definitely." He grinned. "Good. Mason will be disappointed if Emily doesn't show up. He's already planning what toys to bring her." I drove home with Emily babbling in her car seat, occasionally saying Mason, with the same tone she usually reserved for cookie or playground. It had been a good day. Normal, even. I'd forgotten how nice normal could feel. The next week, I found myself choosing my outfit more carefully than usual. Nothing dramatic. Just clean jeans instead of the paint-splattered ones, a shirt that didn't have mystery stains on the shoulder. You know, the basic maintenance that had become optional when your primary companion was a toddler. Caleb was already there when we arrived, Mason playing with blocks in the corner. He waved us over and I noticed he'd made the same wardrobe upgrade I had. "Emily!" Mason called out, holding up a block like it was the most exciting thing in the world. We fell into an easy routine over the following weeks. The support group became less about parenting advice and more about the comfortable conversation that happened before and after meetings. Caleb would save us seats. I'd bring extra snacks that Emily would inevitably share with Mason. I learned that he was a contractor who specialized in kitchen renovations, that he'd moved back to town 3 years ago to help with his aging parents, that his sister Jessica was working 2 jobs to finish nursing school. He learned that I'd been on my own with Emily since she was born, that I worked in marketing, that I missed having grown-up conversations. "You're good with her," he said one afternoon, watching me negotiate a toy dispute between Emily and another child with diplomatic precision. "Patient but firm. That's not easy to balance. Some days I feel like I'm winging it completely," I admitted. "Like there should be a manual for this, and I missed the day they handed them out." "If there was a manual, half the stuff wouldn't apply anyway," he said. "Kids don't read instructions." I laughed and realized it was the first time I'd laughed about parenting stress instead of just enduring it. Something about his perspective made the daily challenges feel manageable instead of overwhelming. After 6 weeks of group meetings, Caleb asked if Emily and I wanted to join him and Mason for lunch after the next session. "Nothing fancy," he said quickly. "There's a diner down the street with a kids' menu and crayons. Mason loves their grilled cheese." I said yes before I could overthink it. Emily loved grilled cheese too. The diner was exactly as advertised. Red vinyl booths, a jukebox that probably hadn't been updated since 1985, and crayons that had been used by approximately 3,000 previous children. Emily and Mason immediately claimed a box of crayons and began creating what I generously called abstract art on their paper placemats. "This is nice," I said, meaning it. "Yeah, it is." Caleb looked around the diner with satisfaction. "I used to come here with my dad when I was Mason's age. Same booth, actually. Some things never change. We talked about everything and nothing. Work, the weather, funny things our kids had said, places we'd traveled or wanted to travel. Easy conversation that flowed without effort, punctuated by the occasional need to prevent Emily from eating her crayons or help Mason reach his milk. When Emily started getting fussy, signaling the approach of nap time, I began gathering our things. "Same time next week?" Caleb asked, echoing the question that had become our weekly ritual. "Actually," I said, surprising myself with my boldness, "would you and Mason want to come to the park near my apartment Saturday morning? Emily loves the swings there." His smile was worth the risk. "We'd love that." As I buckled Emily into her car seat, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't just looking forward to next week's support group meeting. I was looking forward to Saturday, to spending time with Caleb that had nothing to do with parenting advice or community center coffee. For the first time since David died, I was interested in someone. Not just grateful for adult conversation or appreciative of help with Emily, but genuinely interested in getting to know someone better. The thought should have scared me. Instead, it felt like hope. Saturday morning came with the kind of crisp autumn weather that makes you want to spend all day outside. Emily woke up in an unusually good mood, chattering about Mason play, while I changed her diaper and dressed her in the little overalls she loved because they had pockets. The park was only a 10-minute walk from our apartment, but I'd been there enough times to know which playground equipment was age-appropriate and which would result in scraped knees or worse. Emily made a beeline for the swings the moment she spotted them, as predictable as sunrise. Caleb and Mason arrived 5 minutes after we did, Mason immediately running toward Emily with the focused determination toddlers bring to important social missions. Caleb carried a thermos and wore a jacket that brought out the green in his eyes. Not that I was noticing such things. "Coffee?" he offered, holding up the thermos. I figured public park benches and caffeine go hand in hand. "You're officially my favorite person," I said, accepting the cup he poured. The coffee was perfect, strong enough to actually help, not too hot to drink immediately. We settled onto a bench with clear sightlines to both kids, who had found a patch of fallen leaves and were conducting some kind of experiment involving throwing them as high as possible and giggling when they fluttered down. "This is their idea of science," I observed. "Important research," Caleb agreed seriously. "Gravity testing requires rigorous methodology." I snorted, coffee nearly coming out my nose. "You did not just make a physics joke while watching toddlers play in leaves." "I absolutely did, and I'm not sorry." Something about his grin made my stomach flutter in a way that had nothing to do with caffeine. When was the last time someone had made me laugh like that? When was the last time I'd felt attractive, interesting, worth flirting with? "Tell me something about yourself that has nothing to do with kids," I said impulsively. He considered this seriously, as if it were a complex philosophical question. "I build furniture in my garage, not professionally, just for fun, I guess. Chairs, mostly. Sometimes tables. That's unexpectedly impressive. What's unexpected about it?" I gestured vaguely at his general appearance. "You look like someone who builds furniture, all competent and practical." "I meant it's impressive that you do it for fun, not just because you have to fix something. What do you do for fun that has nothing to do with kids?" I opened my mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. "I watch Netflix after Emily goes to bed, read marketing blogs. God, that's depressing. I used to have hobbies." "What kind of hobbies?" "Photography. I was actually pretty good at it in college. Had all this equipment, spent weekends driving around looking for interesting shots. Now I only take pictures of Emily, and they're all blurry because she won't sit still." Caleb studied my face with the kind of attention that made me self-conscious in the best way. "What stopped you?" "Life, I guess. Hard to pursue artistic vision when you're covered in baby spit and running on 3 hours of sleep. Emily's not a baby anymore." He was right, and I realized I'd been using her infancy as an excuse long after she'd outgrown the stage that made photography impossible. Fear, maybe. Fear that I wasn't as good as I remembered, or that the person who'd loved taking pictures had disappeared along with everything else in my old life. "Maybe I should try again," I said, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "You should. I'd like to see your work sometime." Emily chose that moment to present us with a leaf collection, each specimen carefully selected for maximum crunchiness. She climbed onto my lap and began showing me the unique qualities of each leaf with the seriousness of a museum curator. "This one yellow," she announced, holding up a maple leaf that was more brown than yellow but close enough for a 2-year-old. "Beautiful," I agreed. "What about this one?" We spent 20 minutes cataloging leaves while Mason showed Caleb his rock collection, which apparently had very specific organizational principles that only made sense to a toddler mind. "We should probably head home soon," I said eventually, noting the signs of impending meltdown in Emily's increasing fussiness. "Nap time approaches." "This was really nice," Caleb said, helping gather scattered toys. "We should do it again. Would you like to come for dinner sometime this week?" The invitation slipped out before I could second-guess myself. Nothing fancy, probably pasta and whatever vegetables Emily will actually eat, but I'd love that. His immediate acceptance caught me off guard. I'd been prepared for polite deflection or the need to convince him that dinner with a toddler could actually be enjoyable. "Wednesday?" I suggested. "Around 6? "Perfect. Can I bring anything?" "Just yourself. And Mason, obviously, if Jessica doesn't mind." As we walked back to the parking area, Emily holding my hand and chattering about her leaf collection, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: anticipation. Not the practical anticipation of checking items off a to-do list or getting through another day, but the warm, fluttery anticipation of looking forward to something purely because it would be enjoyable. Wednesday couldn't come fast enough. When it did arrive, I spent more time preparing than I'd spent on anything in months. Not just cooking, though I did make an actual meal instead of my usual rotation of kid-friendly convenience foods, but cleaning, setting the table with plates that matched, even putting flowers in a vase. Emily helped by organizing her toy box, which mostly involved taking everything out and putting it back in a different order. But she was excited about Mason coming dinner and kept asking when he would arrive. Caleb knocked on our door at exactly 6 o'clock, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing a shirt I suspected was reserved for special occasions. Mason had a small backpack that I assumed contained emergency entertainment supplies, the kind of preparation that marked an experienced caregiver. "Something smells incredible," Caleb said, following me into the kitchen. "Garlic bread and optimism," I said. The pasta's still cooking, but Emily insisted on taste testing the sauce approximately 14 times, so I'm confident it meets toddler approval standards. Dinner was surprisingly smooth, as Emily and Mason entertained each other with a complex game involving passing crayons back and forth while making increasingly elaborate sound effects. The adults managed to have actual conversation between referee duties. "This is really good," Caleb said, twirling pasta around his fork with the practiced motion of someone who'd eaten plenty of meals while managing a small child. "When you said nothing fancy, I was expecting hot dogs." "I save hot dogs for special occasions," I said dryly, "like when I've completely given up on life." He laughed, and I felt that flutter again. When was the last time I'd made someone laugh on purpose? When was the last time I'd wanted to? After dinner, we moved to the living room while the kids played with Emily's toys. Caleb helped clean up without being asked, navigating my kitchen like he'd been there before. "Easy, comfortable, natural. Thank you for this," he said as we finished loading the dishwasher. "For inviting us. Mason doesn't get a lot of normal family experiences." "What do you mean?" His expression grew more serious. "Jessica's doing her best, but working 2 jobs and school doesn't leave much time for dinner parties. Mason spends most evenings with babysitters or at daycare. This kind of thing. Sitting around a table, adults talking while kids play nearby. It's good for him." I looked at Emily and Mason, who had discovered the magic of building block towers specifically for the purpose of knocking them down. "It's good for Emily, too. And for me, if I'm being honest." "Lonely?" he asked gently. "Sometimes. More than sometimes, actually. You don't realize how much adult conversation you need until you're not getting any." We stood there in comfortable silence, watching our kids destroy and rebuild their architectural creations with the dedication of tiny demolition experts. "Natalie," Caleb said, and something in his tone made me look at him more carefully. "Would you like to go out sometime? Just the 2 of us?" My heart stopped, then started again at double speed. "Are you asking me on a date?" "I'm definitely asking you on a date." I looked at Emily, who was showing Mason how to make his blocks into a bridge, completely absorbed in her engineering project. "When was the last time I'd been on a date? When was the last time I'd wanted to be on a date?" "Yes," I said. "I'd like that." His smile was so bright I had to resist the urge to shield my eyes. "Saturday night? I know a place." Our first official date was at a little Italian restaurant downtown that had exactly the right balance of grown-up atmosphere and understanding that not everyone eating there was necessarily a sophisticated diner. Caleb wore a navy button-down that made his eyes even more green, and I wore the one dress I owned that hadn't been compromised by toddler-related stains. We talked for 3 hours. 3 actual hours of uninterrupted adult conversation, covering everything from travel dreams to childhood embarrassments, to the books we'd loved and lost track of in the chaos of daily life. When the waiter finally approached with the check, I was surprised the restaurant was still serving dinner. It felt like we'd just arrived. "I should get home," I said reluctantly, glancing at my watch. Emily was with Sarah for the evening, but I didn't want to push my luck with the babysitting arrangement. "Of course," Caleb said, standing to help with my coat in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and thoughtful. Though I have to admit, I'm not ready for this to end. Me neither. In the parking lot, he walked me to my car, hands in his pockets like a teenager on his first date. The comparison wasn't entirely inaccurate. I felt like a teenager myself, nervous and excited and completely out of practice with the delicate dance of new romance. "I had a really good time," I said, fumbling with my keys. "Good enough to do it again?" "Definitely." He leaned down and kissed me, soft and brief and perfect. When he pulled back, his smile was gentle. "I'll call you tomorrow?" "You better." I drove home with the radio turned up and the windows cracked, feeling more like myself than I had in years. Not the exhausted single mother version of myself, not the grieving widow version, just Natalie. The person I'd been before life got complicated, plus some hard-earned wisdom and a lot more appreciation for simple pleasures. The second date was a picnic in the park with Emily and Mason, because finding childcare for 2 single parents required the kind of advanced planning usually reserved for military operations. The third date was coffee after the support group meeting, which had evolved from parenting resource to excuse to see each other weekly. By the fourth date, Emily was asking when Caleb and Mason were coming over again, and I realized we'd moved beyond casual dating into something that resembled a relationship. The thought should have terrified me. It had been 3 years since David died, and I hadn't so much as looked at another man with interest. Instead, it felt right in a way I hadn't expected. 6 months later, Caleb asked if he could keep a change of clothes at my apartment. For practical reasons, he explained, though his grin suggested the reasons weren't entirely practical. In case I get called to an emergency project and need clean clothes. Emergency kitchen renovation? I asked skeptically. You never know when someone might have a cabinet crisis. I cleared out a drawer for him that same evening. A year later, he brought up the possibility of moving in together. We were making breakfast in my kitchen. Well, he was making breakfast while I attempted to convince Emily that fruit was an acceptable breakfast food and not a personal attack on her freedom, when he mentioned that his lease was up for renewal. I could find a bigger place, he said casually, flipping pancakes with the kind of competence that never stopped impressing me. 2 bedrooms? Maybe 3. Room for Emily to have her own space. Mason to visit whenever Jessica needs help. Emily looked up from her systematic destruction of a banana. Caleb live here? Would you like that? I asked her. She considered this with the seriousness she brought to all major decisions. Caleb make good breakfast. That's true, I agreed. He does make good breakfast. And Mason come too? Sometimes, Caleb said, when he needs a place to stay. Okay, Emily declared, returning to her banana with the matter settled. I looked at Caleb, who was watching me with the careful expression of someone trying not to look too hopeful. Are you sure you want to sign up for the chaos? I've been living in the chaos for over a year, he pointed out. I'm pretty sure I can handle making it official. We found a 3-bedroom house with a big kitchen and a backyard perfect for Emily's endless energy. Moving day was controlled chaos, with Jessica and Sarah helping wrangle kids and boxes, while Caleb and I attempted to create some kind of organizational system that would allow us to find basic necessities like coffee and Emily's favorite stuffed animal. This feels very domestic, Jessica observed, watching Caleb hang Emily's artwork on the refrigerator with the same care he'd give a museum piece. It is domestic, I said. Terrifyingly domestic. Good terrifying or bad terrifying? I watched Emily show Mason where she'd decided his toys should live when he visited, and Caleb explaining the new coffee maker to me with the patience of someone who understood that caffeine was essential to my morning functionality. Good terrifying, I said. Definitely good terrifying. By the time Emily turned 4, our household had found its rhythm. Caleb left for work early. I worked from the home office we'd set up in the 3rd bedroom, and Emily attended preschool 3 days a week. Evenings were dinner together, bedtime stories that both adults were allowed to read, and the comfortable chaos of a family that had chosen each other. It was Jessica who first brought up the subject of marriage, during one of our monthly coffee dates while the kids played at the indoor playground. So when's the wedding? She asked without preamble, stirring sugar into her latte with the casual air of someone discussing weekend plans. What wedding? Yours and Caleb's. You've been living together for almost 2 years. Emily calls him Dad half the time. You guys act like you've been married for decades. I figured you were just waiting for the right moment to make it official. I hadn't thought about marriage, which was strange considering how naturally our relationship had evolved. We'd moved through every other milestone without formal discussion. Dating, meeting each other's important people, moving in together, becoming a family unit. Marriage felt like the logical next step, but it also felt like something that required actual conversation rather than assumed progression. Has he mentioned it to you? Jessica grinned. He's been shopping for rings for 3 months. Apparently he wants something that matches your practical personality, but isn't so practical it looks like a business transaction. My heart did something complicated. He's been ring shopping? Did I spoil the surprise? He's going to kill me. No, you didn't spoil anything. I hadn't thought about it. But you want to marry him? It wasn't a question, but I considered it anyway. Did I want to marry Caleb? The answer came easily, without doubt or hesitation. Yes, I said. I really do. 2 months later, Caleb proposed during Emily's bedtime story, because apparently he knew me well enough to understand that I'd want our daughter to be part of the moment, rather than excluded from it. He'd chosen a simple solitaire that was exactly what I would have picked for myself, if I'd ever allowed myself to think about such things. Will you marry us? He asked Emily, who was sitting between us on her bed, clutching her stuffed elephant. Both? She asked, looking back and forth between us. Both, he confirmed. We're a package deal. Emily considered this with her usual seriousness. Do I get to wear a pretty dress? The prettiest dress we can find, I promised. Then okay, she declared. We get married. That night, after Emily was asleep and we'd called everyone with our news, Caleb and I sat in our kitchen planning a wedding that would be small, simple, and everything we wanted. Are you nervous about meeting my family? He asked, tracing patterns on the back of my hand. I hadn't thought much about his family beyond knowing they existed. His parents lived about 4 hours away, and he had a sister named Rachel who lived in another state. We'd talked to them on the phone a few times, but our relationship had developed in the insular bubble of daily life. Work, Emily, our small circle of friends. Should I be nervous?